Make the choice to begin anywhere in your life, and the journey has started. And along the way, be inspired. Listen to the stories by joining the president of Howard University, Dr. Wayne A.I. Frederick, on The Journey.
As a graduate of Howard University's MBA program, he ultimately returned to alma mater in 2011, serving in positions of increasing responsibility within the School of Business, from professor to associate dean of academic affairs and administration, to his appointment as dean of the prestigious Howard University School of Business in May 2020. Hello, my name is Dr. Wayne Frederick, and my guest today, Dr. Anthony Wilborn, joins me for an insightful conversation about his life experiences, career journey, and his aspirations for the Howard University School of Business. Dr. Wilborn, welcome to the journey.
Thank you, Mr. President. Happy to be here.
So let's start with where it all began. Let our audience know about where it began. Where did you go to elementary school and middle school?
Well, I grew up in Flint, Michigan, which is well known to everybody today as the home of the water crisis. At the time that I grew up, Flint was a very well-known middle-class population dominated by General Motors and all the plants that were located there. So I kind of grew up in that environment with the intent that everybody was expected to graduate from high school and go work on one of the assembly lines. I decided not to do that, and so I wanted to pursue something different. And decided to go on to college, which was relatively rare for people around that time frame. It was like the early 80s. I think that it was a good choice for me because it was right around the time where GM was making the shift for moving the opportunities away from Flint, out of the country and so forth. It was a significant downturn that had a major impact on the city and the environment. But it was a great opportunity for my family. My family had migrated from the South. They all worked in General Motors without high school educations, but it provided us with an opportunity to have a comfortable middle class lifestyle in spite of the lack of opportunities they had.
And what do you think drove you to want to go to college versus kind of joining the business?
Yeah, I had a couple of mentors in high school that were driving me in that direction. At the time when I was in high school, I actually did part-time work at a vocational school. It was an opportunity that the high school provided for us. And I came across a mentor who actually had a degree in electrical engineering. I was taking an electronics class. And he saw something in me to suggest that maybe I could go down that route. So he provided me with the direction, the mentorship to pursue a career or a degree in information systems and engineering. So I went down that road. It was very difficult at the time because, again, my high school was not a college prep high school. It was a typical public high school with the intent of just shipping people into the plants.
How mixed was your high school?
Well, it was relatively mixed. Michigan at the time was, I think probably 50-50, white, black. Michigan at the time had a pretty long tradition of integration. Even my mother, who went to high school in the 50s, were in integrated high schools. So it was relatively mixed for us.
I see. And so once you decided to go to college, what was the decision making like? Being in Michigan, I would imagine Michigan State, University of Michigan were options, but what led you to your decision to attend Michigan State?
At the time, again, there weren't a lot of people who were going to college. Most of the people who went to college when I grew up were going for athletic scholarships. So we didn't have a lot of exposure to the opportunities outside of Michigan. I ran track in high school, so I got the chance to go to various colleges for track meets and so forth. So my options were relatively limited to Michigan State, University of Michigan, Eastern Michigan, and those things. And plus, I was the first in my family to go to college. So I had nobody to give me any particular direction about HBCUs or other opportunities outside of Michigan. So that's kind of where I landed.
And you ended up doing electrical engineering there.
Yep.
Was that because of the influence of your mentor and how much of an interest you yourself developed in electrical engineering based on your high school exposure?
It was mostly my mentor. I thought I wanted to be an architect. That was my original goal. Right. When he opened the opportunity, my eyes to the opportunity of electrical engineering, I just went for it, not really knowing exactly what it was, or what degree of difficulty there was in doing it. And I stumbled initially because, again, it wasn't a college prep environment that I came from, so I had to really acclimate myself to the college environment very quickly. But I think I got through it fairly well. Some of my colleagues didn't. It's a very, very difficult major, but I was fortunate enough to make it through.
Now, when you finished, did you go straight to getting your MBA, or did you work for some time?
No, I worked as an engineer for at least 4 or 5 years. I started at a company called Westinghouse, where I was working with them on building radar systems for F-16 fighter planes and commercial radar systems. I spent a couple of years there. I wasn't happy with the work because I was working in a lab and we were building all these various modules, very, very detailed oriented work, and I thought I wanted to have a broader perspective about how these companies worked outside of just the labs and the focus on that. I left there, I worked some time in satellite communications. I went to Booz Allen as a consultant, Booz Allen Hamilton, and worked in satellite communications for a while. And it was around that time I decided I wanted to kind of shift away from the pure engineering and do something that would combine the two, and that's when I joined Howard's MBA program.
So before you get there, the work environment, I would imagine at that time, in terms of electrical engineers, how diverse, or for that matter, lack of diversity, and which locations you worked in for Westinghouse and Booz Allen?
Yeah, when I graduated Michigan State, I moved directly here to the Washington, D.C. area. So I was working up in Baltimore with Westinghouse. It wasn't very diverse at all when it came to engineering. Fortunately, the plant that I was working in was very diverse because a lot of the assembly workers were from Baltimore. But in terms of engineers themselves, there was very frequently I found myself in conference rooms and meetings where I was the only African American and the youngest, which was intimidating to some degree coming from where I came from. Yeah. So yeah, it was not a very diverse environment. You didn't have a lot of people going into engineering, a lot of African Americans going into engineering at that time.
Right. Why Howard's MBA program? What attracted you to Howard's MBA program? Seeing that you were in Baltimore, Maryland, there are lots of MBA programs in this DMV area. I like to tell people the district is like a college town, in my opinion, but nevertheless, you had other options. Why Howard?
I had come from, again, Michigan State, a predominantly white institution. At the time, Michigan State had about 45,000 students and about 2,000 of us were black. So it was a very, very white environment, for lack of a better term. And when I came here, I initially started taking classes at University of Maryland, working towards a degree, a master's degree there. But I found myself thinking, oh, this is very similar to what I've been exposed to. I was working in the corporate environment, dealing with all the kind of microaggressions associated with that. And I just felt, okay, I need to do something different. And so I actually came down to Howard's Business School and just walked around. I walked into the office, had a conversation with the MBA director, and he convinced me that this was the place to be, to address some of the concerns I had about working in these environments where we weren't necessarily welcomed. And so I jumped at the opportunity. And
what was your experience like doing your MBA program here?
I loved it here. And again, if we go back to some of the concepts that we've known over the years about, you know, the double consciousness theory and those kind of things from W.E.B. Du Bois, the fact that you can learn in an environment where you don't have to deal with being the minority or the one that's not part of the process, and you're actually learning and being comfortable where you're learning and working with people and learning with people that are like you, who know your culture, it was fantastic. It was a great experience for me, very new for me, and I jumped right in.
I often tell people, you know, the difference is, I think when you come to Howard, you earn your D. You know, you don't have to question that somebody's giving you a D because of some other esoteric reason. So you finish your MBA, you decide to go back into the corporate world.
Yeah.
And what was that like?
Yeah, it was. I finished my MBA and immediately started into consulting with another company, and immediately started seeing some of the same issues. And so I found myself at a company called American Management System. I was there for 5 years, and I would be working on projects with a variety of different people, MBAs from Harvard and Cornell and other places. And I was standing there with my Howard MBA telling them I'm here and I'm just as comfortable in this space, just as intelligent, can make a significant contribution. But there was always a look down the nose from the upper elite MBA programs. And I dealt with that very well. I think the people who came with me in those environments demonstrated that we can make a contribution and we can make an important contribution. And I found myself in leadership positions there, leading various projects before I end up leaving there and deciding to pursue my doctorate degree.
You know, it's interesting because if you look at the data of Harvard's MBA program, if you would describe that as, you know, one of the upper tier programs, over the course of 50 years or now 50 plus years of having African American students, the number one supplier is Harvard undergrad, and number two has been Howard undergrad. So, it's kind of like a bit ironic that people think that way, but you're right, that's what we experience in the workforce.
Yep, and the people who are leading the charge at this company, of course, they came from those environments as well. So the plum jobs always went to the Harvards and the Princeton MBAs, and so I had to fight to get in those positions.
So you decided to make a complete switch, to get your PhD. What was that conversation like with your loved ones and significant others?
Sure.
At this, because now you're not, coming out of high school and trying to leave the state of Michigan. Now you're, fully formed. You've been in the corporate world twice now.
Yeah.
Went back to school, got your MBA, and now you're thinking of going back to school again. How was that received?
It was an interesting transition. I had spent at that point, I had been in corporate America probably about 14, 15 years. And I was just kind of getting burnt out by it. I was doing a lot of traveling as a consultant across the country. I spent about 9 months in Denver. I was working in New York. And I was just getting tired and thought it was time for me to do something else. And in particular, to make a contribution back to society. And so I wanted to make a shift. And so I started working at the Federal Reserve down on Constitution Avenue and got accepted into the PhD program at George Washington. And so I was actually doing both simultaneously. The GW gave me the latitude to be able to do that, and plus George Washington was only like 3 blocks away. But the most difficult transition was when I finished that and decided, okay, now I want to make the shift to academia, because that required me to take a significant pay cut in addition to changing my mindset about work and what that meant to be a researcher and an academician versus a corporate person.
And what was your PhD focused on?
I made an effort to try to combine the two worlds I was operating in. So I wanted to look at it, the technical aspects of business and the management aspects. And so it was in management of science, technology, and innovation with a supporting field in strategic management and entrepreneurship.
Right. And as you know, I'm on the Federal Reserve Board for the 5th District. Federal Reserve is a very unique place, I tell people, in terms of if you love data, and you want to see how data can drive policy, I think it's one of the best examples of that. What was your impression being at the Federal Reserve in terms of the role it plays?
I loved it. I mean, it's as you said, it's a very unique place because it's quasi-government. It's not necessarily a government agency, and it operates independently, which gives them the opportunity to be more innovative in their thinking and approach. I had oversight over Reserve Bank operations, and so anything that the Reserve Banks wanted to do from an operational standpoint, whether it was check processing systems or applications around postal money orders or whatever it was, they had to come to the board for approval, and we had to get involved with their project. So I had that insight. And they were leading edge at the time in terms of technology, robotics, artificial intelligence, you name it. And so I loved the opportunity to work there. It was fantastic.
Yeah. And so you decided to get back into academics, and you decided to join Morgan State.
Yeah.
What was your role at Morgan State initially, and what did that grow into?
And again, interestingly enough, I had opportunities to go other places. I had interviewed for jobs at Johns Hopkins and other areas. But it was something telling me I needed to give back to African American students, and decided I wanted to go to Morgan State. And so I went there as an assistant professor, eventually became associate professor in information systems. And so I taught in production and operations management, a few classes in information systems and so forth. And also worked on a research project or grant from the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration for about 10 years. In collaboration with one of your colleagues, Larry Robinson, who's now the president at FAMU. He and I worked together on that, where we're doing studies in environmental science and environmental management and policy.
Right. And obviously, Morgan State is a historically black college and university. I think you would have seen a wide variety of students there. What was your impression of the student body and their needs?
Well, again, looking at the mission of Morgan, which is very similar to Howard, the mission is to take students who may not have opportunities to get higher education and shape them, to make them something that's going to make a contribution on the back end. And I saw that firsthand because I saw students coming in as freshmen who were very raw, And Morgan did an exceptional job in training them, educating them, preparing them for the corporate world. And I saw many of them graduate and go on to leadership positions. And I've seen some who have come back to me even years later who are doing quite well. And again, I think all HBCUs have that same framework, but there are some who do it exceptionally well. Howard is one, and Morgan was certainly one that did that.
Right. So at this point, you spent quite a few years away from Howard. You were at Morgan State for what, 12 years?
12 years, yep.
So you spent some 17 years or so after your MBA away from Howard and plus. And what brings you back?
There was a pull to come back to the Mecca, as I think all of us who are in this position where we went to school here and came back in some capacity. I always had my eye, actually when I graduated my doctoral program, I wanted to come to Howard, but there wasn't an opportunity at the time. Mm-hmm. So I always wanted to come back here. And so when I was at Morgan, around the time of that 10th or 12th year, I had to make a decision. Am I going to pursue the full professorship at Morgan, or do I want to try to make this leap right now? Because I had tenure at Morgan, so I had to give up tenure to come to Howard, which was a sacrifice in and of itself. But I wanted to be here. I had several conversations with Dr. Harvey, who was dean at the time, mm-hmm. over a year and a half or so. And I thought it was something that I needed to do, was to get back on this campus and see what I could do to continue the legacies of excellence here.
And who was the dean when you did your MBA?
When I did my MBA, it was actually the initial dean, Milton Wilson, was mm-hmm. the dean at the time. Yep. When I graduated, I think it was his last year as dean. Excellent. So I've known Milton Wilson all the way up through Dr. Harvey, and it's interesting now that I'm in this position and in this chair myself.
Right, that's exactly right. So as a faculty member, what would you describe was your focus in terms of your academic scholarship, and as well kind of what you started to see administratively?
Yeah, so my area of research is in technology strategy, where I was looking at corporate, particularly small businesses, and looking at how they developed the expertise to use technology in a strategic way that would allow them to succeed financially and also eventually contribute to their long-term success. And so which required me to dive deep into strategic management generally. And so with regards to that, all of my research was shaped around that, and it also bled into what I was doing administratively. So when I became associate dean, one of the things that I was tasked with doing by Dr. Harvey and wanted to do was to figure out ways to look at processes that would help us be more efficient in what we did. And so I pulled in aspects of project management, which I had studied, and I have a PMP in that realm. I pulled in aspects of process improvement, because I'd done some stuff in Six Sigma Green Belt and those kinds of things. So I took all of my disciplines from research and practice mm-hmm. and work in corporate space and kind of melded it all together to what I did in the School of Business and administrative functions. And
somewhere along the way, you wrote a fictional novel.
I did, yeah.
Tell us about that. That sounds like a good part-time hobby there.
It was something I always wanted to do. Right. So I sat down one day and said, oh, I'm gonna do this. And so I framed it out in my typical engineering mind, laid it all out in what I wanted to do and what the storyline was going to be, who the characters were, and so forth. And over about 3 months, I mapped out what this novel was going to be, and then I spent about 6 months writing it. And it was all again technology driven. The storyline was based on a secret society of African American women who are very, very intelligent and steeped in technology, and how that secret society of women was being kind of challenged by a nemesis who kind of stumbled on their secrets. Right. And so that was kind of the gist of the novel. I think it did quite well.
And what was the name of it?
The Enigma of Njama. Right. So there's a lot of African American and African-centered themes throughout the entire the book. Right.
So you now are the dean at the School of Business, where I myself also received my MBA. Mm-hmm. What are your future plans? What do you see for Howard University's School of Business? So
the education in the business world has changed dramatically in the last couple of years, probably the last decade. And so what I've determined is that we need to adapt to that change. And some of the changes that we've seen is an infusion in technology into the business world. So students have to be technology literate. We have to develop a sense of leadership in our students so that they can go out and make a contribution, because we've seen, for example, a dearth of leadership in the country that's eminent from folks who were educated in business years ago who did not have the same emphasis on leadership and ethics. And so we need to infuse more ethics into what we do. And just a sense of having students more aware of the geopolitical, socioeconomic impact that business decisions make on the world. And so those kinds of things are the things I want to infuse in our students, which means that we have to develop a curriculum that's more flexible, that allows students to pursue those things. And so I'm looking at trying to make some shifts in our curriculum to give students opportunities to specialize in functional areas that may be more appropriate in today's environment than the traditional standard marketing degree or finance degree or information systems.
The School of Business has received some significant gifts recently to start some new and energized programs. Maybe you want to mention a couple of those and how you see those growing and being launched.
And that kind of is consistent with what I just mentioned. For example, we just received a $10 million gift from HPS to develop a Center for Financial Excellence. And that is going to allow our students to pursue a very specific focus in the area of finance that our students have not been exposed to in the past. So for example, private equity and investment management. Those areas are very hard for our students to break down the walls to get into, because the firms in those areas tend to focus on very specific targeted schools, and Howard was not one of them. So this gives us a leg up to get our students prepared to get into the private equity world, because we're going to create curriculum around that, co-curricular and extracurricular activities, seminars and workshops. HPS is going to allow us to have access to internships, and we'll broaden that to other private equity firms as well. So it's, again, giving us an identity around a space that we haven't been involved with. And the same thing with the gift we got from Warner Music and the Vlatnik Foundation, getting us access to areas of the music industry from the back end and the business side, not from the entertainment side, and giving our students access to those jobs, and those jobs at the executive levels, not the entry level.
Yeah. And then the Marriott Gift, in excess of 21 million, that looks at hospitality and so on. But the aspects of that include real estate and those types of things that, quite frankly, have been very, very fruitful for investors as well as practitioners. How do you see that working beyond just the hospitality industry?
Sure. And so again, there are a large number of schools that focus on hospitality. Cornell, for example, is very well known in that space. But I think what we want to do here, and what Marriott wants to do as well, is create a pipeline of students who can enter into the corporate space and create a diverse environment at the executive levels. And so in order to do that, the way I envision it, these students have to be not learned in the aspects of running a hotel at the lower level, at the operational level, but some of the executive decisions that go with that. So we need to get our students prepared to understand aspects of commercial real estate, supply chain management, inventory management, yield management, those kinds of things, and even environmental management at the executive level, so that they can come out of our program and hopefully build in some internships with Marriott and other companies. They can come out of our program, and as opposed to being entry-level desk clerk at a hotel, they can go into the executive level where the decisions are made and make an immediate contribution. So we're trying to create that pipeline to the executive suite through this funding.
Yeah. And as we close, I ask all my guests this, especially if they're alum, but you have two perspectives, alum and the Dean of the School of Business. Why Howard?
Howard is a special place, no matter how you slice it. The legacy here, the people here, the love for this institution is incredible. And the work that we do, bar none, cannot be duplicated, I don't think, anywhere. We take students who are coming in, some of them very intelligent, many of them very intelligent, but maybe coming from disadvantaged backgrounds and need an opportunity. And they come into a space that has a very long history of doing that. And I'm happy to be a part of making that transition, shaping these students, seeing where they come from as a freshman through their graduation, and coming back and making significant contributions. And the School of Business has a host of alum who can demonstrate that the world can change by hiring a Howard MBA or Howard undergrad business student.
Absolutely right. Thanks for being here. My guest today was Dr. Anthony Wilbon, the Dean of the Howard University School of Business. I'm Dr. Wayne Frederick. Please join me next time on The Journey.
This program was produced by WHUT and made possible by contributions from viewers like you. For more information on this program or any other program, please visit our website at whut.org. Thank you.